Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the In the Money Players podcast. This is our Hong Kong International Races edition, and we've put together a panel for you to help you in your form study, your handicapping, whatever you want to call it, for these races that are on. They're out at fairly unusual times if you're in Eastern time in the U.S. or if you're in the time zone of England and Ireland as well, whatever they're calling that this time of year. Saturday night for us, early Sunday morning over in England and Ireland. Going to be a lot of fun. Can't wait to get the thoughts of our panel, who we will introduce. First of all, the man to the right of me, as I look at my screen here. He is a USA professional punter for, 15 years now, and he has changed his focus, still does plenty of USA stuff, but really started including some of the Hong Kong stuff as well, and makes his own data. Very interested to hear the thoughts of professional player Sean Boarman. Sean, how are you today?
Good, Pete. Thanks for having me on.
Right beneath Sean is somebody else who's a frequent guest on the shows, often in his role as the Grand Poobah, as I like to call him, over at the Thoroughbred Idea Foundation. But for many years, he ran communications over at the Hong Kong Jockey Club. He's also a sharp horse player and good friend. Pat Cummings, what's up, my man?
Hi, Pete. Great to be with you again, and one of my favorite days of the year on the global racing calendar. So excited to talk about them.
And then directly beneath me in our little four-shot here, a man who I've worked with extensively in his role as a Sky Sports presenter. You've also read his thoughts on Hong Kong, not only on his Twitter account, but largely over at theraces.com. At the Races, of course, sponsoring the show. You can get all the coverage and form you need about this Hong Kong race meeting and all Hong Kong race meetings over at theraces.com. And very happy to welcome to the show Tim Carroll. Tim, what's up?
Hey, thanks, Peter. Great to join you. Really looking forward to it. A little bit like Pat, this is one of my favorite meetings. It's kind of, in a way, saving the best for last.
I almost put into your introduction there, Tim, I was almost going to describe you as an afflicted New York Jets fan. I do have to ask, how in the world did an Aussie become an NFL fan, let alone one of the New York Jets?
Well, I started following them. I'm not going to tell you my age, but I started following them a little bit before pay TV days. And we used to get like 2 games a week in Australia when I was a kid. And it was one of the first teams I've watched. And having gone to New York a few times myself, like a lot of people in the world, it really is my favorite city away from home. And I'd just like to point out that we will be getting the first draft pick for the season as well. Don't worry about that.
Pat, one more general question before we get started. A little bit about the history of this Hong Kong International Races Day. When did this begin? And talk about its place in the global landscape.
Yeah, the origin of the races, Pete, date back to the late 1980s and evolved through the course of the 1990s. And the races were a little piecemeal. They had international participation, but it was really that they really started to come into their own in the late 1990s, and have emerged as really one of the great days on the global calendar, kind of a year-ending festival of international racing. And it's a place where you get a ton of intersecting form lines, and I think it's one of the most interesting race days on the calendar because of it, because you have the previous year tends to be fully exposed. And it's also one of the few places where you get significant Japanese participation intermingling with European participation, occasionally some from Australia, one or two sometimes from America, or at least in some way, shape, or form, the Breeders' Cup form gets represented. Here this year, it's substantial in the fact that that big long shot order of Australia is in the mix, the Breeders' Cup Mile shocking winner. And that intersection makes it really fun and is a great way to kind of cap off the thoroughbred flat season for a calendar year.
Sean, I'm really curious to get your thoughts about this meeting. This is, I believe, the first year you've sort of fully been involved in playing Hong Kong day in, day out. How are you going to be looking to get a form on some of these horses who are shipping in to the circuit? What does this mean to you as a USA player?
It's going to be tough for me, especially the Japanese horses. I have just no information on them at all. I'll try to dig around here in the next couple of days and figure something out. But, a lot of the Europeans that are coming in, I've got some info on. So that's not a problem. But the Japanese are going to be tough for me to get a form line on.
Tim, what would your advice be to Sean or other players around the world listening? I know there is plenty of info over at atheraces.com, as we mentioned, but any special insight into keeping on top of the Japanese form?
I think with the Japanese form, you've got to remember that the one thing they've got very much in their favour, the Japanese are bred for and mostly run on very quick ground, like we get at Sha Tin. In fact, Sha Tin, I would say, and I don't know if Pat would agree, but I think two of the best turf courses you'll find anywhere in the world as far as the actual turf goes, Meidan and Sha Tin. So I do think it really suits the Japanese horses. I also think it actually suits the European horses who like quicker ground more than maybe the American tracks like Keeneland. So I wouldn't be surprised if one or two horses who maybe got turned over at the breeders perform better here in Hong Kong on the weekend.
Does that all make sense to you, Pat?
Absolutely. The going condition in Japan might sometimes be listed as good or firm, when really it's best described sometimes as rock hard. And they love a little rattling in the ground. I'd say in that respect, the Sha Tin turf can actually offer a little bit of relief from rock hard ground. It has a sandier base and is a little more forgiving, but it's tremendous ground. This is the best time of year for it. And it's almost always a race day that is run in firm conditions. And so when you get the Japanese that sometimes have come off of wet track races that come to Hong Kong, things can look a little different. Overall, the international participation this year is lighter, given the circumstances that we're facing, but still adds a very unique blend to these races, top to bottom. I think it just makes for a great betting day. I mean, every Hong Kong race day is a great betting day, but this in particular adds a nice little twist to it for those that are partaking in the international commingled tote. It's a really fantastic day.
So we've got a 10-race card. On this show, we're just going to be focusing on the 4 Group 1 races, but just so folks know, things kick off with the first race, which will be super early in the morning in the UK, 4:25, which would be 11:25 at night Eastern time for horse players here on the East Coast. And then the first race that we're going to talk about, which is the Hong Kong Vase, that will be going down at 6 a.m. London time, a little bit easier to get up for that than the first race on the card, which of course will be 1 a.m. Eastern time. What's your plan, Sean? You're going to be staying up late for this one, or are you going to put in bets? How are you going to handle it? I'm
planning on staying up for it, subject to change based on how the little girls are doing that day and how bedtime goes. But my plan is to stay up and just be a zombie Sunday.
All right, we're going to start off with race number 4, 6 a.m., the Longines Hong Kong Vase. It's a Group 1 for 4-year-olds and up, and a field of 7 attracted. Pat Cummings, we're going to start with you. I don't know why I'm picking you. You're geometrically not in the right place for me to start with, but this is what I'm doing.
Oh, yeah. Sure, Pete. Happily. Look, I think that this is a race that is a little bit more unique this year than others. It normally gets a full field, and it's normally heavily populated with European shippers. This year, that's not the case. We have only 7 to go postward, and so you have to expect that there's going to be a bit of a degree of a more tactical race here. Exultant was a winner of this race in 2018 and was probably the best thing beaten in a Hong Kong Vase last year. Maybe only second to Highland Real, who was also a good thing beaten in the 2016 edition of this race when Japan lifted the Vase with Satono Crown. He absolutely set a ridiculous pace in this race last year. He was drawn in gate 14. Zach Purton sent him out from the extreme outside, sent him forward. They ran the early splits were 24-8 and 23-0, ridiculously fast for this race. And he ended up finishing third, well beaten 3 3/4. But the first, second, fourth, fifth, and sixth place finishers were respectively 7th, 8th, 14th, 11th, and 13th after the first 6 furlongs of the race. So for him to have gone forward, and it's worth noting the second, third, and fifth place horses after the first early pace calls finished 12th, 13th, and 14th. I mean, he was incredibly good in defeat in this race last year. 2400's easily his best go, 4 for 6 over the trip. It's a small field. It'll be a bit more of a tactical race. The pace isn't as clear to me, but I really think Exultant is just easily the best horse in this race over this course, and is really the horse that's going to take all the beating. They've been looking to get him back to the 1.5 miles. It's easily his best trip. Has had 2 races over shorter trips. But I think all things considered, he's getting a soft bunch and really shapes up really well in this. So I think it's going to be very hard to get away from Zach Purton and Exultant.
Sean, what do you think? Is it as simple as Exultant in this year's Hong Kong Vase?
I want to disagree because I feel like on my information, Exultant has sort of tailed off his last few races and isn't the horse he was last year. But Pat's right, man. He's got a great tactical advantage and probably the best jock over there day in and day out. Moreira's beating him in the standings right now, but Purton is fantastic. He's certainly going to get the best trip. I'm gonna bet Mogul in there. I was really impressed with Mogul's race in the Breeders' Cup. I thought, he made a little move on the backside, but was still able to finish and make up ground in the lane against Tarnawa, and that, he really ran sort of a sneaky good race in there. But to me, it's got to be one of those two because this is a pretty weak field for this level. Tim,
how do you see it?
Yeah, look, I agree with both, but I'm going to side with Sean. I've got a little bit of a concern with Exultant. I don't see a lot of pace in the race again this year, and he is versatile. We've seen Zach ride him from the back and ride him from the front, but I'm just a little bit, I suppose, curious to see what Zach's going to do on him this year. His record over this trip is absolutely brilliant, as Pat pointed out. I'm pretty sure he's 4 from 5 with his only defeat that luckless run last year. But the one thing he's always lacked, and I'm a big fan of the horse, he's the reigning horse of the year, but the one thing he's always lacked is a turn of foot. He's more one of these sort of horses that can make a big, long, sweeping move. And I've always kind of thought that he's probably a little bit vulnerable to a horse that's got a turn of foot. Now, you probably didn't see that from Mogul in America, but unfortunately that race just didn't pan out for him. I don't think the track really suited him either. He got back, he got held up, and as we know, Channel Maker got a pretty good time of it on the front end, even though the winner came from the back, but I think she might be a pretty special horse. If you go back to the start prior, when he won the Prix de Paris in France, he actually showed a turn of foot that day, and he looked a very good horse. The horse that was back in second subsequently came out and ran second in the Arc. So the form has a rock-solid look about it. And just one other thing I'd point out, he's the only 3-year-old in the contest. Now, what are we, a few weeks away from the new season? He gets £5 at this time of the year. That looks generous to me. I've got a lot of time for Exultant. I wouldn't put you off the forecast, but you're going to have to pick it in the correct order because, let's be honest, it's not going to pay a mozza, but I'm going to side with Mogul.
Let's move on to race number 5. I should have mentioned before, you can watch all this if you're in the UK and Ireland on Sky Sports Racing. In the USA through your ADW is probably the most logical way to check things out. But you can watch along on Sky. The second of these races, Sky Sports Racing, I should say, the Longines Hong Kong Sprint, the Group 1 action continues here over the 6 furlongs. And Tim, we'll keep it with you.
Well, this is a really interesting race. There's no doubt Classique Legend is the class of the race. If you're to purely back on ratings or on the CV, you'd go straight to Classique Legend. But Couple of things worry me. Firstly, I think it's been fairly well documented. Casper Founds has said numerous times now he feels like he's a little bit behind the eight ball with him. I know he's been a bit more bullish over the last week. Now, I don't confess to knowing anything about how this horse works, but I watched the recent trial there in Hong Kong, and I've got to be honest, I wasn't overly impressed. There was a couple of others that ran through the line a lot stronger. The other thing that really worries me here, Peter, this horse is drawn in one. Now, he normally gets back in the run. I don't think you want to be 3-4 back on the rail in this sprint in Hong Kong. And when you look at it, we've had, 14 renewals of this race, I think? Not one horse has ever won it from the one stall. Now, don't get me wrong. You don't want to be drawn on the outside, but I think he's got a bad draw. I think there's enough question marks to look elsewhere. The obvious one for me is Hot King Prawn. He ran second in this race last year, and he'd only had the one run in 11 months. He came off a long break. It's been different this year. He's had 2 lead-ups to it, and last time out he won the traditional trial for this. If you look at the bare form, you'd say he only won it by a small margin, but he set out 3 deep the whole way without cover. It was a lot better win than it looked on paper, and I just think that he's probably the safety play, and I think the draw in 5 is absolutely perfect.
Good stuff. I saw you nodding your head there, Sean. Did you have similar trip notes about Hot King Prawn in this spot, and what do you think is going to happen in this year's Hong Kong Sprint?
Yeah, I completely agree with Tim. I thought Hot King Prawn's prep race was phenomenal. He ran faster at every point of call than he did in his prior race. He did it tough. I mean, he was stuck wide with no cover and just, finished great. I think he's definitely the horse I want to be on for this race.
Pat, what are your thoughts on the sprint? Can we make it 3 from 3?
I think he might be a single on the day, Pete, Hot King Prawn. And what neither of these guys have mentioned yet is that since that last race, he came back and had a tremendously impressive looking trial on the dirt at Sha Tin. I think he is looking absolutely bang on for this and really do like him quite. But it is worth talking about some others. Just to top off of what Tim said about Classique Legend, as impressive as he was in the Everest, that was really the top performance of his career, I would say. He comes into this essentially the highest rated private purchase import to Hong Kong in some time, but he finds himself in between. When international horses normally come into Hong Kong for these races, they come in and they race within about 10 days. He's been here for more than a month and a half. Local horses who are coming from overseas to be permanently imported to Hong Kong normally have several months of acclimatizing. He falls in this strange middle ground that you just don't see happen here frequently. This is a very unique entree into Hong Kong for him. And with that rail draw, I do think there are some issues. Looking at the 2 Japanese runners, number 5, Danon Smash, and number 6, Tower of London. First, Tower of London's coming off a very long break and is going to have to do this first up and get to things fresh. Danon Smash is interesting. I thought that he would be hopeless if he drew an inside barrier because of the way that he's been breaking of late. He's been breaking, a step or two slow in some of these races in Japan, which kind of goes against what I think has had him best, which was his win back in May in the KO High Spring Cup, where he led from go to woe and was right on the choo-choo. He's been a little off of that lately. And so he's actually drawn out in 14. Ryan Moore's going to try and give him the best ride. It's not going to be an easy trip, but this will give him a better chance to secure a decent trip with pace in front of him and some logical riding from Ryan Moore. Could see Danon Smash actually run pretty well in this. So I prefer him the most of the 2 Japanese horses. And beyond that, I will say get the number here exactly. Number 9, Rattan. Had an absolutely brutal start in the Jockey Club sprint leading into this, ran on very well, gets Chad Schofield, which I think is a local improvement over Antoine Hamlin, and Rattan potentially at a big price could be fruitful in some of the deeper bets.
Good thoughts there. Let's skip over the 6th race and go to our next Group 1, which goes as the 7th. 7:50 in the morning in UK and Ireland, which means 2:50 in East Coast time. A little bit easier maybe for some folks to wake up and put on Sky Sports Racing and watch this one. We've got an interesting 10-runner field in this spot. And Sean Boarman, I'm going to go with you first. What do you think of this Longines Hong Kong Mile?
Well, I mean, the race probably goes through Golden 60, I would imagine. I mean, he's just solid as a rock, really. He's tactical and got a turn of foot. He's won how many in a row? 1, 2, got every race on his page, it looks like. So, he's the one to beat. I would imagine he probably is the most likely winner, but I'm a little interested in Order of Australia coming.
Really?
Yeah, I have absolutely no clue where that race came from, but it was a good race. He ran fast throughout it, and
maybe he was running at the wrong distance his whole career. I mean, I can tell you
know where that run came from either, just quietly.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm a little interested in him if he's any kind of price. The rest of them, I don't have much feel for the rest of this field, to be honest.
Pat, we'll send it down to you, and we'll start specifically with Order of Australia, who obviously was such an upset winner at the Breeders' Cup. Do you think he might have another upset in him?
I think he has no chance, Pete. So that's my opinion on Order of Australia, and I don't want to waste anyone else's time talking about it.
We'll let you two fight this. We'll figure out a way for you two to, have some sort of steel cage match about this, or at least side bet. Who do you like in the race, though, Pat?
This race has belonged to Hong Kong or Japan. You go back in the record books, it is almost impossible to find a European runner being that competitive against either the locals or those in Japan. You have the two-time winner of the race, Beauty Generation, who seemingly is, on the regression headed towards retirement. You have Admire Mars, who won this race last year in a really significant upset. He has put in timed track work in 5 of the last 6 days. He's sensational looking in the mornings, watching the live track work feed and the videos. He's looked really good there. And then you have a string of other Hong Kong locals, including an interesting horse in Waikuku trained by John Size, who shocked in this race. Maybe not shocked, at least in terms of the tote price, but surprised with a horse coming off of a long layoff when Glorious Days won this in either 2013 or 2014, I forget, which, you would think would be a really tough thing to do in Hong Kong, and it is. And John Size has been able to do it before. Waikuku ran second in this race behind Admire Mars last year, but will have to do it off of a 6 or 8 month break. I don't like him. If anyone is going to challenge Golden 60, I do think it's Admire Mars, the Japanese horse who won this race last year and has looked great. And one other that I'll throw out, I don't like him at the draw that he ended up getting, but Southern Legend. No, excuse me. The draw is not a huge concern, drawn in 6. I had written something down incorrectly before, but look, he's just incredibly consistent. He's shown up. He won the Champions Mile last year, and really is Casper knows how to get him right for the best and the big days. And Golden 60. Probably had his measure last time. I think Southern Legend was maybe taken out of his game a little bit too close to the pace. I think things will be a little bit faster for him here, and so Southern Legend is potentially the fly in the ointment for the local horses.
Tim, the two obvious questions I'm supposed to ask you, obviously, are you with Golden 60, currently odds on in the betting here early in the week? And whose side of the Order of Australia argument are you on? Say he was going to be 10-1. Would he be one you'd want to keep on side like Sean, or happy to oppose like Pat?
I'm somewhere in between Sean and Pat's take on that one. Probably closer to Pat, to be fair. I think if you ran that Breeders' Cup Mile 3 times, you get 3 different results. I thought the third horse and 1 or 2 others were very unlucky. So, no, I'm not with Order of Australia at 10-1 or whatever price, because simply I think this is a really good mile race, even though it might only be a field of 10, and I can't really get away from the top 2 that were spoken about, Golden 60 and Admire Mars. It really pains me to say this because I latched on the Golden 60 very early on in his career, like a lot of people did in Hong Kong, and I've got so much time for the horse. I've said many times in my article on the ATR website, I'd love to see him in a race like the Dubai Turf or over in Europe in the Queen Anne, something like that. But at the prices, not the form, at the prices or the likely prices on the day, I've got to be with Admire Mars. I just think he might be a little bit of value against Golden 60 here. He was beaten in his lead-up, but it was a very good effort in behind a very good horse. And if anything, I actually think his lead-up this year was a little bit better than his lead-up last year. I don't think there's a lot between the pair, and I just think the disparity in the betting leads me towards Admire Mars. But if you really like Golden 60, I certainly wouldn't put you off because he's a cracking horse. So personally, I think, even though the ratings don't have him quite there yet, personally, I think he's the best horse in Hong Kong and by some way.
At the moment, 5-6, Golden 60, 6-1, Admire Mars, just to reference those prices.
What price order of Australia, Pete?
Tens.
I think he will be significantly higher on the tote on the day in Hong Kong. I think maybe as much as 50% higher, 15s or so.
So wait on, potentially wait if you are like Sean in the Order of Australia camp. Let's talk about the eighth race, the last one we're going to talk about. A couple other races on the card we might touch on before we get out of here. But the final Group 1 is the Longines Hong Kong Cup, going 1.25 miles. And we'll go back to you to kick things off, Pat. What do you like in this spot? Some very familiar names for USA horse player, at least in terms of Magical making her return to the races. What do you think is going to happen?
So in terms of kind of history for the race, the last European-based winner of the race was Snow Fairy back in 2010. It's been a while between drinks for Europeans in this race. Hong Kong and Japan, again, have been the ones to share it. So you have Magical in that capacity. She's drawn the rail for this. You have Time Warp, who won this race back in 2017, a front-running masterpiece. You have Win Bright, who won this race last year and is 2 from 2 in Hong Kong. Both of them big Group 1 wins. He clearly loves things at Sha Tin. You have the French representative, Scaletti, who has gotten a little bit unlucky in the sense that he's gelded, and so he couldn't have gone after some of the real big European prizes, but it's very hard to argue with his record, 12 wins from 16 starts in his lifetime. Ran very well in England when kind of facing premier competition in the Champion Stakes, where he was second behind Adabe. And then you've got a horse like Furore, a Hong Kong Derby winner from a couple of years ago, who seemed to really kind of fall apart last year. He was the favorite for this race in 2019. He was just above 2-1 for that race, and Tony Cruz has seemingly found the ticket with him, and he has 2 local wins to kick off his local campaign of this season. So. And then you have a Japanese mare named Normcore, who ran a pretty good 4th when wide in the Hong Kong Mile last year. And actually, I think is probably the interesting kind of long shot of the day. Now, Christophe Soumillon has had to deal with some COVID testing-related issues and has not been cleared from his quarantine. He's off all mounts on Sunday. He had 9 scheduled. Only 3 other jockeys had 9. I mean, he was staring down a big day. He loses Normcore. Zach Purton picks up that ride. And as Sean indicated earlier, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that change in riders. And Normcore sizzled down the turf at Sha Tin in her work earlier this week. I think she's a very interesting player in here because she was completely thrown out of her game last time in the QE2 Cup in Japan. She went forward. And it was a race that seemingly lacked any serious pace, and she just got an absolutely terrible ride, totally taken out of her game. If she comes back to anything that is like how she normally has run, she ran incredibly well in the Sapporo Canin, beating Persian Knight prior to this, looked really good doing it, and has a fairly decent run over the track at Sha Tin. So I see the race in 2. I'm with both Furore, who Tony Cruz seems to have really spot on. He sent him up to Chung Fa in the offseason, which I think refreshed him well, and he's come back good, and Normcore. So it's really a bit of a Quinella play for me, Furore and Normcore in the Longines Hong Kong Cup.
Tim Carroll, how do you see this one?
Well, again, I think if you went purely on CV, you'd be all over Magical. And let's be honest, she's having a final start. She's a multiple Group 1 winner. This will be a 14th spin on the bounce at the very top level. So no one would deny her a win in this race, although I kind of think it might have been just slightly a bit of an afterthought when having been beaten in the breeders. The Europeans are interesting at this meeting because it's the end of a long season. And for every performance we get, like a Highland Reel or a Snow Fairy, we get a Poet's Word who finished in behind Time Warp that year, went back to Europe, defeated Cracksman, then defeated Crystal Ocean, then run an unlucky second to Roaring Lion. So it's difficult to know what we're going to get out of Magical on the day. We know at the best she'd be the one to beat here, but I'm actually with Furore. I think he's just a completely different horse. He was a hugely promising 4-year-old, a Derby winner, Classic Mile winner. As Pat said, for whatever reason, the wheels fell off last season. I mean, he wasn't hopeless, but he certainly went backwards. I'm not sure why. Change of yard, he's come back this time. He's won his last two. And not only has he won them, he's had a horse by the name of Exultant back in second, and he's beaten him hands down both times. Now, I know Exultant's better over a little bit further, but the thing that really got me about Furore, and the one thing you see in these brilliant Group 1 horses all around the world, mostly when you're talking about turf, is a big turn of foot. And all of a sudden, this horse has found this massive turn of foot again. And I just think that I think he can repel the locals. I know he hasn't quite got the reputation or the CV that they've got, the locals, the internationals, I should say, but I think he can repel them. The other thing is I think tactically he's very versatile. I think Joe will be able to ride him whichever way he likes, and I think we can give this one to the locals.
All right, Sean, what's it going to be for you in this year's Hong Kong Cup?
This is a tricky spot for me because while I agree with everything the guys have said about Furore, on my stuff, he just hasn't run that fast. I mean, he's been very visually impressive. He's seemingly turned the corner back into a positive form cycle, but he just hasn't run that fast. And he's gotten good trips, probably going to get another one with Moreira riding. But, it's hard for me to take a short price on a horse that just isn't that impressive on figures. So I was sort of against the locals and was leaning more towards the internationals with, the three they've mentioned, the Win Bright and Magical and Normcore, the ones that I sort of want to be on. But I've got to make the wagering decision. Do I use Furore defensively, or do I just throw them out and hope my figures are right? Not sure what I'll do there, but I'll probably just let the tote decide that for me. If he's real short, I'm not going to use him.
11-4 in the betting right now for Furore. 11-4 Magical. 7-2 Denon Premium, and Scaletti at 8. I realize I didn't recap the betting about the races we were talking about a little bit earlier in the sprint. Right now, Classique Legend 13-8, Hot King Prawn 10-3, 10-1 and bigger the rest. And then looking back at the Vaz, the ones we spent most of the time talking about, 4-5 Exultant and 9-4 Mogul. We have another minute, so I want to ask each of you a question just to prep you a little. Tim and Pat, I'll probably ask you something specific about this card and maybe another race you're looking forward to watching, if not betting on. Sean, with you, I want to make a more general inquiry about Hong Kong and how you've found approaching these pools as a USA punter. Is it something you'd recommend for other serious USA horse players to look at? What do you like about playing in Hong Kong?
I love betting over there. It's a little frustrating just because the nature of turf racing and the nature of the racing there is you're going to take some brutal beats right at the wire. I mean, they come flying late and you're going to get bobbed and it's frustrating, but the potential payoffs are tremendous. And, for me, it's a good circuit to play because it's always full fields. Pace matters, even though it's predominantly turf racing, it's not grab and hold and finish all the time. I mean, they'll send horses. There's real paces in some of these races. Trips really matter. And if you're willing to do the work, there are huge potential payoffs over there. I think it's a great circuit. I think anybody that's not paying attention over there is losing opportunities if you're a serious player.
Hey, Peter, could I add to that point, if that's all right, as someone who does the punting in Hong Kong? One thing you find is, I know it's a small pool of horses, it's 2 racetracks, but I think the handicapping system over there is close to the most perfect handicapping system you'll find anywhere in the world. But that kind of means you get some really tight racing, because the handicapper generally is absolutely spot on. The other thing I would say, and I don't want to be too controversial, but it's very rare. You'll see mistakes in races and you'll see bad luck, but it's very rare you look at a horse there and think, are you really trying? Do you know what I mean? It's the cleanest racing in the world without exception. And I think that makes it a great place to punt, personally, myself.
Good stuff. I'm glad you did add on to that, Tim. What about on this card specifically? What's another race you're looking forward to betting, Tim?
Well, in the penultimate race, we've got a horse who's 5 from 5. He's not going to be any price, but Winning Dreamer, he's potentially a very good sprinter in the making. He's an excitement machine. You tend to find on the undercard here horses that perform well today quite often will go on with it. You might see them in the bigger races next year. So Winning Dreamer is the one I'd nominate on the undercard, but from a punting perspective, you're not going to be getting much of a price.
Still seems like something worth paying attention to. How about you, Pat? What's another race you're looking forward to watching?
The last of the day, if I can find a way to make it through. I might need a Saturday afternoon nap to ensure it, but it's a full field of 14 going 1,600. These are it's always a very competitive race, and this is the race in particular that Tim suggested is one where we tend to see some future stars emerge going forward. Abel Friend, the great Abel Friend, ran in this race before he jumped onto the international scene in Hong Kong. Field of 14, and a lot of these horses are headed to the 4-year-old Classic Series in Hong Kong. The Classic Mile, Classic Cup ends with the Hong Kong Derby in March. And I will give you a horse that is not in that category, but number 6, Super Wealthy, I think has taken a little while to ramp up this season. I think he will be spot on for this. But you have the likes of Shadow Hero, the Summit, Tourbillon Diamond. He was known as Eric the Eel in Australia. You have a debuting European, I think it is, in Vitrolite. Very interesting race. Some real up-and-comers from Hong Kong that will be in, or from all over the world that have come into Hong Kong, permanent imports. And it really, just to second what Sean and Tim have said, this is, to me, it's the best betting in the world. And if you're not partaking in the Hong Kong affair week in and week out, and you like racing and you like having a bet, you're shortchanging yourself. It's not just because this is the biggest day. This is a great place to have a bet, and I can't recommend it enough.
Good stuff. I really appreciate all your contributions. And every time I sit down and talk with one of you about Hong Kong, it makes me realize I need to make it much more of a focus than it is. But it's been great to create this show with you all. Look forward to watching on Sky Sports Racing, if that's an available option. And then again, all the coverage form and further analysis from Tim can be found over at theraces.com. Thank you, Sean Boarman. Thank you, Pat Cummings. Thank you, Tim Carroll. Godspeed to all of you in your wagering and for the mounts that you bet on this Saturday, Sunday, whatever it happens to be, for your point in the world. Also want to thank our partners over at the Races, especially Matthew Taylor. Great to get to continue working with you in this different context. Hopefully the first of many projects we get to work on like this. And I want to thank all the viewers for tuning in, watching us on YouTube, and or following us via inthemoneypodcast.com. It's fun to create horse racing content when you have people willing to interact and share their thoughts, like everybody that we get to deal with on a daily basis at this point. This show's been a production of In the Money Media. Our chief technology officer, I don't know what to call him. He's the man who's always pushing all the right buttons, and I need to thank him more than I do. That's producer Craig himself, DJ Unstable, Craig Gorbanoff. Our business manager is Drew Coatney. Our chief creative officer is Jonathan Kinchin. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your photos.